From Florence, Italy, the city of inspiration for sculptors in ages past and for centuries to come, you're listening to The Sculptor's Funeral. Good day to you all, and welcome once again to The Sculptor's Funeral, the podcast for figurative sculptors around the world. I'm your host, Jason Arkles, a sculptor and educator living and working in Florence, Italy, where all the great sculptors are dead. And I don't feel so well myself. And today, we continue the dramatized reading of the Autobiography of Giovanni Dupr&e. Now, if you missed last week's episode, you might want to listen to that episode before listening to this one. This one's sort of the part two. Although I think part two can stand pretty well on its own, so it's not mandatory. But before we jump back into it, I'll just quickly recap as to who Giovanni Dupr&e was and what happened in his life thus far. So Giovanni Dupr&e was born in Siena in 1817 and moved to Florence as a child, the son of a poor woodcarver, and became himself apprenticed as a child to a series of woodcarvers. Although Dupr&e longed for a fine arts education and dreamed of becoming a real live sculptor, his finances and station in life pretty much forbade that, despite both his diligent hard work and natural ability. He got married before he was 20 years old and eked out a living in various wood carving shops, before striking out as a freelance woodcarver. And although he was never a student at the Accademia di Firenze here in Florence, the triennial sculpture competition held there was open to anyone. And in Dupr&e's first year competing there, in 1838, he tied for first place. Now, this caused a bit of a stir at the Accademia when a workshop-trained craftsman was judged to be equal to the best students of the Accademia, and it earned him a few enemies. However, it also got him a bit of notoriety, and with that came a few modest commissions. But Giovanni Dupr&e was far from being assured of a future in figurative sculpture. It seems as though for every advancement Giovanni Dupr&e made in his work or in his career, there were at least as many bitter disappointments. And this is where we pick up the thread of the story, in the year 1841 or so, when Giovanni Dupr&e was 24 years old. And now the Sculptor's Funeral Theater presents the concluding chapter of the Autobiography of Giovanni Dupr&e. It happened that a competition in sculpture was opened in Siena, in which no one could compete but those who were of that country and province. And naturally, I determined to compete. The only other competitor was the young sculptor Enea Beccaroni, a pupil of the academy there. Another wished to enter into the competition, and this was Giovanni Lucini, an accomplished sculptor who had lately returned from Rome, where he had been pensioned for 4 years, he having gained the prize at the quadrennial competition of our academy in Florence. But he was not allowed to come in, for although, like Beccaroni and myself, he was a native of Siena, he was inadmissible because he had passed the age decreed by the rules. This competition was called the Biringucci, from the name of the worthy man who, by his will, had founded a prize and pension for sculpture, as well as others for painting, architecture, and various sciences that I don't remember. I had already for some time prepared myself for this competition, which required that the artist should be shut up in a room by himself, and there should make, in the course of one day, from morning till evening, a sketch in clay of some subjects drawn by him by lot at the moment of entering the studio. For a considerable time I had made nothing but sketches, and within a space of time certainly not greater than that allowed by the competition, I had in fact made some dozen, and by practice had become so rapid in composition that whatever subject might be given me, I felt fully equipped so as to be able to come out of the struggle with honor. Now one day, it was a Sunday, I was standing in my little studio in the Via del Palagio and modeling one of these sketches, the subject of which was Elias carried away in the chariot. I was working with good will, and I was happy and in the vein. My father had come to see me, and he was sitting and quietly reading the Bible. The bell rang, and a letter was given me bearing the postmark of Siena, and I recognized the handwriting of the secretary of the competition, Signore Corsini. I opened the letter, and read that the government had suppressed the pension for sculpture as being superfluous, and had disposed of the sum by appropriating it to a chair at the university, and therefore the competition would not take place. I see as if he were now before me, my father, starting up suddenly and exclaiming, "What have you done?" With one blow of my fist I had smashed to pieces my poor Elias, and he saw it on the ground between the legs of the horse. "Read," I said, giving him the letter. Scarcely had he fixed his eyes upon it than he grew red and stamped with his feet. I was at once aware that I had acted ill in giving away thus brutally to my irritation. This I have recounted out of love of the truth, and that those who know me now may see how different I was then, and how ludicrously that excitability of character, which I still feel, but which I have learned how to repress, was exhibited in that tragic destruction of that poor sketch. And this, too, was of advantage. Just as the gossip and incredulity about the first competition was, the refusal to give work was also an advantage, when I went seeking about from studio to studio, and it was denied to me, even in terms of scorn. It was all of advantage to me. It obliged me to concentrate myself, and seeing myself rejected on all sides, to will and to know, and with God's assistance to make my place with my own unassisted powers. It was all right. Thoroughly right, I repeat it. I began now to turn over in my mind a new subject which would be serious and sympathetic, and into which I could pour my whole heart, strength, will, hopes, and all. And I found it. Among the pictures, bronzes, and terracotta of Pacchetti's shop, where I used to often wander about, I was struck by a group in terracotta of a Pietà. The figure of Christ especially seemed to me beautiful, and I had half a mind to make a dead Christ, and went about ruminating in my mind over the composition. Certainly a dead Christ would be, as it always is, a very sublime theme, but yet I was not satisfied. I wished to find a new subject, and as the Bible was familiar to me, the death of Abel suggested itself, and I seized upon it with settled purpose. I sought for a studio to shut myself up in with the model, and found one in the Piazzetta of San Simone, opposite the church. I then put together a few lire to buy me 2 stands, one for the living model and one for the clay. Among the nude figures which I saw in the evenings when I went to draw, I selected the one that seemed to me best adapted for the subject, and I arranged with him to come to me every afternoon, as I was employed in wood-carving all the morning. I had already made several sketches, but I wished to make one from life so as to be sure of a good movement and a true expression. It was on Shrove Thursday in 1842, and all the world who could and wished to do so were walking about in the Corso. The model and I were shut up together in the studio, and it was nothing less than a miracle that that day was not the last of both our lives. Poor Brina, he's still living, as old as I am, and he still stands as a model at our academy. And this is the way in which we ran the risk of losing our lives. In the studio, which I had hired, there was no way of putting up a stove except by carrying the chimney up through the upper floor and so out through the roof. Now, the expense of doing this was large, and for me, very large. So I determined to make a sketch from life, and from this to put up my clay, and I hoped to be able to go on with the model without fire until the warmer season came on. But these days were so extremely cold that the model could not remain naked even for a few minutes, and we determined to warm up the room with a pan of coals, in which, apparently, there remained a residuum of the powdery dregs of charcoal. The brazier having been lighted, and at intervals stirred up, the room, which was small, was soon tolerably warm. I was intent on modeling with my tool the outlines and planes of my sketch, and moving about the model to assure myself of the movement and the ensemble, when I felt an oppression on my head. But I attribute it to the intensity of my labor, and on I went. Suddenly, I saw the model make a slight movement and draw a long and deep sigh, and the eyes and the color of his face were like those of a dead man. I ran to help him, but my legs would not hold me up. I half lost my senses, my sight grew dimmer. I made an effort to open the door, and I fell to the ground. But I had strength enough left to drag myself along to it, and kneeling, I laid hold of the lock, but the handle would not move, and with the left thumb I was obliged to raise the spring, and with the right hand to draw the bolt, and to do it quickly. I was wrestling with death, as I well knew, and I redoubled my efforts with the determination not to die. By good fortune, by my panting, I drew in a little breath of pure fresh air through the keyhole, and at last I pulled back the bolt and threw it wide open, and I sat there drinking in full draughts of the outer air. In the streets there was not a living soul, but I could hear the joyous shouts from the races in the piazza of Santa Croce nearby. Poor Brina gasped and rolled his eyes. The air which came blowing into the room revived him, but he could not rise. I had entirely recovered, except that I felt a tight band around my head. I ran to the nearest shop, got a little vinegar, mixed it with water, and dashed it over his face. We then extinguished the fire and went away. I began to model the statue a few days after. My mornings, up to 1 p.m., were employed in wood-carving, and all the afternoon I modeled. In this way I went on for some time, and the statue was fairly well in advance, but I required a little more money. The want of this made me rather doubtful whether I should be able to finish the model in time for the exhibition in September. I required 30 or 40 francs a month for 5 months in order to go on till September. By the advice of Signore Antonio Sfera, a publisher of prints, I made a petition, to which Professore Pietro Benvenuti, Aristemo Costoli, Giuseppe Sabatelli, and Emilio Santarelli were kind enough to append their names. This petition, which I now have under my eye, and which I have copied literally, was as follows. It was not dictated or written by me. My friend Giuseppe Saltini, now government physician at Scrofiano, did me this favor. Illustrissimi Signori, the undersigned, being desirous to submit to the judgment of the public a work of sculpture at the exhibition of the Academy of Fine Arts during the current year, has begun to model for his studio a figure of life size representing a dying Abel. Family circumstances have, however, deprived him of the means which were required to bring this work to a conclusion. Regretting to find his money and labor spent thus far to no purpose, he refers himself to the philanthropy of his countrymen, in the hope that they will lend him their assistance. The sum required he has calculated at 40 francs a month until the time of said exhibition. He begs to inform all those persons who will kindly lend him their aid and honor him with a visit that the statue which he has begun is at his studio, opposite the church of San Simone, where the undersigned will be glad to express to them his gratitude, and where the undersigned professors, in attestation of their goodwill, have not disdained to honor him with their approbation. He subscribes himself as their most devoted and obliged servant, Giovanni Dupr&. And thus I obtained 26 lire a month for 5 months, which were sufficient to enable me to finish the Abel. From that time forward, I have troubled nobody. Thanks to the aid of those generous persons who assisted me, and whose names, as I read them, thrill me to the heart, I went on every day with my model, carefully copying him, and giving it a proper expression. There was a moment when I hesitated as to the name I should give my statue, or I should rather say that this hesitation was induced by the Cavaliere Pietro Benvenuti, who thought that, in consequence of the absence of any clear attributes to explain the subject, I should rather call it an Adonis. Now, I had never been greatly impressed either by the name or the story of Adonis, and I had never wished to join the devotees of Olympus, but my respect for this gentleman made me somewhat hesitate, and before going on further, as the difference of subject required a difference of character, expression, and style, I determined to ask the judgment of someone in whose decision I could in every way safely confide, and this person was Bartolini. With this view, I went one morning to his house on Borgo Pinti, having already informed myself that the hour when he would receive me was between 5:30 and 6 p.m. I see him as if it were now. He was seated in his garden with a cup of coffee which he was slowly sipping when I approached him and said, "Signore Maestro, would you do me the honor to visit me at my studio and give me your opinion on a statue that I am modeling?" He answered,
"He called me Maestro, and that is all right. But I don't know you. You are not one of my scholars at the Academy. Who is it then? Who supervises your statue, and who is your master?"
I had some time ago some lessons from Maggi and Cambi, and I'm not unknown to you, who had the kindness to praise a little statuette of mine in wood, the Santa Filomena. But I had asked neither Maggi nor Cambi nor anyone else to correct the statue that I am now making, and this for very good reasons. Bartolini smiled at these words and said to me,
Tomorrow at 6 I will come to see you. Leave your name with the servants and go in peace.
In the evening, when I went home, I said to my wife, Listen, call me early tomorrow morning, for before 6 I must be at my studio, as a professor is coming to see my statue. And she called me, poor dear, and called me in time. How it happened I know not, but I was late, and 6 o'clock was striking as I passed the Piazza di Santa Croce. When I arrived at my studio, I found in the hole of the door lock the card of Bartolini, on which he had written in pencil,
6 o'clock in the morning.
I ran immediately to his studio in the Porta San Frediano to make my excuses and to inform him that I had been but a moment late. He had not taken off his coat, and he was correcting with his pencil a statue, so that the workman might see as soon as he arrived where he should work. As soon as he saw me, and before I had begun to exculpate myself, he said,
Never mind. There is no harm done. I will come again tomorrow. Addio.
It is scarcely necessary for me to say that the next morning I was at my studio by 5 o'clock, and at 6 Bartolini knocked. He came in, looked at the statue, scowling, and pronouncing one of his oaths, which I will not repeat. I begged him to tell me where I was wrong and how I could make it better. He asked me what was the subject, and I told him I intended it for a dying Abel. I then showed him the sketch, upon which was the goat skin that, as yet, I had not put on the large model, in order first to study carefully the nude underneath. And then I told him the objection that Benvenuti had made and his proposal to change the subject. Bartolini answered,
You will do the best possible thing not to change it. For as far as regards the clear indication of the theme, nothing more could be done. Besides, the goat skin, which immediately denotes a shepherd's, the wound of the head, and the expression of the gentleness, explains that is Abel. Now, I will give you a little counsel as the unity of the expression, to which you must carefully attend. The face, you see, is gentle, and is that of a just man who pardons as he dies. The limbs also correspond to his sentiment. There is only one discord, and that is on the left hand. Why have you closed it, while the right hand is open, and just as it should be?
I closed it in order to give variety.
Variety is good when it does not contradict unity. You will do well to open it, like the other, and have nothing else to say.
This comforted me, but wishing to draw from him something more, in an exacting tone I said, And as to the imitation, the character, the form?
The imitation, the character, and the form of the statue show that you are not of the Academy.
Other words he also added, which is not proper for me to report. As to the feet of the statue, he only made a movement with his thumb, and I said, I understand. He looked at me and added,
All the better for you, if you have understood.
This ended all the correction of my statue made by this singular man. It was the first and the last. Bartolini was disdainful and unprejudiced, and called things by their real name. And if anyone seemed to him an ass, he called them an ass, although he might be a senator or a minister. He knew that he was a great sculptor, and liked to be so recognized by all. He was often epigrammatic, and to his pungency he frequently added indecency. Liberal and charitable, jealous of the decorum and education of his family, an admirer of the code of Leopold, Frederick the Great, Napoleon the Great, and the principles of 1789. He liked to be called maestro, and detested to be called professore. He ridiculed all decorations, but what he had he wore constantly. As a sculptor, he was very great. His example was better than his teaching. He restored the school of sculpture by bringing it back to the sound principles of truth. His enemies were numerous and very provoking, but he took no pains to conciliate them. When he was irritated, he struck about him left and right, lashing out fiercely and laughing. By the first days of September I finished the Abel, and the caster, Lelli, who was then also a beginner, undertook the casting and gave his service in the most friendly way, so that the expense should be as small as possible. All my friends, indeed, came forward to aid me in making the mold and casting and removing the outer mold with that brotherly love that I still recall with emotion. They're still living. Ferdinand Folchi, the painter, who served me as my model for the hands, Ulisse Giusti, the carver, Bartolomeo Bianciardi, Paolo Fanfani, and Michele Poggi, all carvers. They came to help me raise and turn over the mold or to give me any other assistance. Folchi and Senesi assisted me in taking off the waste mold, and, in a word, all were eager to see my work finished and put on exhibition. Bartolini told me to select the place at the Academy that I thought best, and that if I found any opposition, as no one but the professors had any right to make the choice of place, to come to him there in the school and he would arrange it for me. I had no occasion to avail myself of this frank and kind offer, for no sooner had Benvenuti seen me and the statue than he said, "Select the place and the light that you prefer." As soon as the exhibition was open, there was a crowd around my statue. Its truth to nature, its appropriateness of expression, and the novelty and sympathetic character of the subject made a great impression, and every day the crowd about the statue increased. But little by little, it began to be whispered about, first in undertones, and then more openly and authoritatively, that the statue was worth nothing, because it was not really a work of art, but merely a cast from life. That I had wished to take in the Academy and masters, scholars, and the public, and that such a living piece of work thus introduced as if it were a work of art, while, in point of fact, it was a mere cast from life, ought at once to be expelled from the public exhibition. And this scandalous talk, which was as absurd as malign, originated among the artists, and especially among the sculptors. It was pushed to such a point that in order to make the fraud clear, they obliged the model, Antonio Petrai, to undress, and laying him down in the same position as the statue, they proceeded with compasses and strips of paper to take all the measures of his body in length and breadth. Naturally, they did not agree in a single measure, for, without intending it or thinking about it, I had made my statue 4 fingers taller and 2 fingers narrower across the back. This beautiful experiment was made in the evening, and the president of the Academy, who by chance surprised him in the very act, reprimanded all severely, not heeding whether among them there were professors. But none the less, this malignant and ridiculous accusation was still kept up, and nothing was said of the failure of the attempted proof. The model himself, who persisted in affirming that the statue was modeled and not cast, was openly jeered, and one person went so far as to tell him that for a bottle of wine he could be made to say anything. The president of the Academy, Signore Montalvo, was quite right in expressing his disapproval of this dirty and impertinent examination, which was made without giving notice to the president and the director of the Academy, but besides this, he felt all the more inclined to assume my defense on account of a little debt of conscience that he had made towards me, and that he wished to pay off. You see, one day, before resolving to take a studio on lease, I made up my mind to petition the Grand Duke to give me one, gratis. The government had then at its disposition several small studios, which were given away, without rent and for an indefinite time, to those young men who either in painting or sculpture gave good promise, not only of aptitude, but also of goodwill and proper conduct. As I did not think myself wanting in all these qualities, I determined to make an application, driven to it, indeed, by necessity. But before presenting my petition, I wished to inform the president of it, and to beg that he would be so kind as to lend his support, as I well knew that petitions of this nature were always passed on to him for due information. Montalvo was a perfect gentleman, of an ancient and wealthy family, instructed in the history of art, a great admirer of it, and a very good friend of all artists, especially of those who, to their artistic skill, added an outward practice of religious duties to which he was a devotee, though, as far as sentiment, enthusiasm, and real taste for art go, he was not distinguished. Accordingly, I went one morning to pay him a visit at his rooms in the gallery of the Uffizi, he being also a director of the gallery. I must here premise that I was not much in his good graces, because I had not studied at the Academy, which he believed to be the true nursery of an artist, and as soon as he saw me, suspecting perhaps what I had come to ask, he said to me, "And what do you want?" "I come, Signore Presidente, to say to you that I have made a petition to His Royal Highness the Grand Duke in the hope of obtaining a studio to make a model of a statue that I wish to exhibit this year at the Academy. My means are narrow because I have a family, and before presenting this petition to the sovereign, I have thought it my duty to inform you, and at the same time to beg your aid, and to use your influence that it might be answered favorably." He answered,
"You are not a pupil of the Academy, and therefore you have no right to ask for a studio, which the grace of a sovereign grants only to those who have completed a study in our Academy of Fine Arts."
"Well, if I have not studied," I answered, "at the Academy, I have competed there and gained the triennial prize, which is the end of the studies at the Academy." The good signore replied with impatience,
"Which then do you think you are, Canova or Thorvaldsen?"
"God save us, Signore President, I never thought this. But it may be permitted to me to observe that even Canova and Thorvaldsen began from small beginnings, and were not born at once great sculptors, as Minerva sprung from the head of Jove." You see that I really had no luck this morning, for the director, rising, said to me,
"Up then! As you argue in this way, I will tell you that, if the petition is referred to me for information, you shall have nothing,"
and then reseated himself. I made my bow and went out. But when I was outside, I wished to put on my hat. I found it was completely crushed. Without being aware of it, I had reduced it to this state. So much the better. You lose as far as your hat is concerned, but you gain in character, and I counsel all young men who find themselves in a similar situation to take the same course. I returned to the event of the exhibition. My name was on the lips of all. Some praised me to the skies, some despised me as the most vulgar of impostors. Bartolini, Pampaloni, and Santarelli openly assumed my defense. The Grand Duke asked Giuseppe Sabatelli about it, and he assured him that the statue was really modeled and not cast from life, as he had been the eyewitness of my work, staying in my studio every morning and had seen me working at it. I was exposed to a tempest of words and looks diametrically opposed to each other. The meaning of these two parties might be rendered by precisely these words: great artist, miserable impostor. My poor wife consoled me by saying,
"Do not be troubled. Do not listen to them. They are irritated because you have done better than they. They will talk, and at last they will hold their peace."
Yes, my dear Marina, they will hold their peace, but in the meantime, what an injury they have done me. A certain person perhaps would have given me an order for the statue, as I know, but after all this absurd and evil-minded chattering, he mistrusts me and now will do nothing, and I am crushed and overcome by the very thing which ought to have given me a reputation and cleared a path for me. In the same way that I made this statue, I know I can make another, and the will to do it is not wanting, but how can I bear the expense? My earnings, as I well see, are not sufficient to support the family and to pay the model, the rent of the studio, and the casting, and to buy what is necessary for the studio. Besides, I tell you, dearest, that I cannot allow you to fatigue yourself with so much work. You labor all day and all the evening, you have a baby to nurse, you get little repose at night, and do you think that I can allow you thus to wear your strength out? I hoped to enable you to get some rest and to lead an easier life, and I thought that I saw before us, after I had breathed the last breath of life into Abel, the beginning of our intellectual and loving life. And now I find that these are and were only vain hopes. In the meantime, without knowing it, I had a friend, in truth a real friend and benefactor, Count Francesco del Benino. Count Benino was an old man of noble and ancient family, and a bachelor, who lived in his own palace in the Borgo Ognissanti. Count Benino had taken a liking to me when I was a little boy in Sani's shop. He was a very great and very intelligent lover of the fine arts, and everything related to them, and was extremely interested that his house should be a model of good taste, from the modest furniture of the entrance hall up to his own private cabinet, which was a wonder to behold. From the time when I was a youth in Sani's shop, and worked for him as a woodcarver, and afterwards while I was working by myself in the Borghese studio, up to the time when I was making the Abel, when he was one of the subscribers to my petition for assistance, and indeed was the largest of them, He never lost sight of me, but often came to pay me a visit while I was modeling Abel, and showed himself delighted with it and sure of my future. And now, perceiving the scandalous plot to put me down, he was indignant. He came to seek me out just at the moment when I was thoroughly discouraged, and knew not what saint to recommend myself. And after saluting me with his customary "Sor Giovanni, che fa?" he seated himself on the only seat I possessed, and seeing that I was oppressed with thought, though I endeavored to put a gay face on it, said to me,
"Oh, don't give up. Courage! Don't you hear how those donkeys bray? What they want is a good cudgel and a hearty beating. Don't think about it. I know what I'm talking about. I frequent the studios, and I see and I feel what a disloyal and foolish war they're waging. I heard a fellow who, with a contemptuous laugh, said, 'The Abel he could cast, because the figure is lying down, but a standing figure he cannot cast. He will not make one this year, nor any other year.' And all the others laughed. And this happened just a few moments ago, and I have come to tell you now that it is your duty to silence the snarling curs. So, dear Giovanni, you must make another statue, and this time a standing figure, and— Now, be silent a moment. I imagine very well what you will say. I understand it all, and I say to you, quit this studio, which is not fit to make a standing figure in, and go and look for another at once. Order the stands which you require, think out your statue, and I will pay whatever sum is necessary. You know where I live. Come there, and you'll find a register on which you must write down the sum that you need, put your signature to it, and when you have orders and work to do, which will not fail to come, when you have a surplus of money, you may pay me back the money I advance. No, say nothing. I don't wish to be thanked. First of all, because I'm not making you a present, and then because I have my own satisfaction out of the proposition I make to you. What I want is to laugh in the face of these rascals who are now deriding you, and me too, because I assert that I have seen you at your work. So you see that I too am an interested party. And now, dear Giovanni, arrivederla. I shall expect to see you and to give you the money you need. Lose no time. Keep up your spirits, and think of me as your very sincere friend."
I ran home with all speed, elated and full of enthusiasm, to tell my wife of the charming proposal of Count Benino. My wife, poor soul, could not understand all this delight, this vehemence and excitement in praise of that kind gentleman, and without saying it she made me understand that she should have greatly preferred my continuing as a woodcarver, without troubling myself about an art which hitherto had only given me disappointment and worry. I looked about to find a studio, and took one in the Niccolini buildings, in the Via Tedesca, now the Via Nazionale. I ordered 2 large modeling stands, one for the living model, the other for the statue in clay. "A standing statue he will not make," they said, "but I will make it, and in movement, too." The idea of Cain came at once into my head. Cain, the first homicide, fratricide, a fierce and tremendous subject and one of great difficulty. I made a sketch, and it seemed to me that I had divined the movement and expression. Among the artists, it was soon known that I had taken a new studio to make another statue, and those who had laughed at first laughed no longer. My friends encouraged me and added fuel to the fire. I also had some offers for the Abel, insufficient as you will, but enough to encourage me, and among the others I accepted that of Signore Lorenzo Mariotti, an agent of the Russian government who lived in his own house in the Piazza Pitti. He came to see me and said that he should like to order the statue of Abel, whenever I would make it, for what it cost me, and then when it was done, he would help me to sell it. The expenses were calculated at 800 scudi, and he offered me this price, with the understanding that whatever sum it was sold for above the 800 scudi should be divided between us. The marble was procured, and I was already modeling with ardor the statue of Cain, and fortunately the Grand Duchess Maria of Russia, daughter of the Emperor Nicholas, was passing through Florence. She had already heard of the discussion, pro and con, which my statue had raised, and she wished to see it, and was so well pleased by it that she did not conceal her delight. She was in company with her husband, the Prince of Leuchtenberg. They went into my private studio and saw the Cain only just begun. She exchanged some words with the prince, and he was much pleased and embraced me. Then the Grand Duchess, pressing my hand, said, The Cain and Abel are mine." Then they departed. When I went home and told the good news to my wife, it seemed as if she had a little more faith in what I was so convinced of, my future career as an artist. The Sculptor's Funeral Theater will return after these important messages. So, what are you doing this summer? Going to the beach, or maybe to the mountains? Or maybe you haven't made your summer plans yet. Well, buddy, I sure have. I'm going to attend the premier event of the summer for figurative sculptors. I'm going to lead an elite cadre of students into the realm of Michelangelo, Bernini, and Rodin. That's right, I am going to carve marble. And you can too. Join me in the Wiltshire Workshop, a 2-week adventure in the English countryside where both beginning and advanced sculptors will take the leap from being mere clay modelers who ship their work off to a foundry to have someone else do the real work, to becoming a sculptor of marble in the tradition of all our favorite sculptors. They all knew how to carve, so why not you? The workshop is happening not far from Stonehenge, in the green countryside of Wiltshire, just outside of Marlborough, where you'll learn everything you'll need to know in order to carve a figurative work in marble. In addition to learning the basics with hand tools and machine tools, you will learn the process of using a macchinetta a punto, or pointing machine, the device which enables sculptors to make exact copies of plaster casts in marble. And that's just what you'll do. Choose from a selection of plaster casts taken from the work of master sculptors of the past, Bernini, Houdon, Michelangelo, and more, and create your very own true and faithful copy to keep. Not many people can claim to own their own mask of Bernini's St. Teresa or Michelangelo's Dying Captive in Carrara marble, and even fewer have made it themselves. But you can be one of them. And the workshop just isn't for sculptors with experience. Even complete beginners and non-sculptors can create a marble work of art in 2 weeks' time. We proved that last year. It can be done. And for those of you who have no experience in carving, well, I'm going to let you in on a little secret. It's actually pretty simple. You just need the right tools and know how to use them. And that's what this workshop is designed to give you, the knowledge of carving and pointing. And after these 2 weeks, you will be fully equipped with the know-how to carry on carving independently in marble and stone. You'll be able to produce work that will stand out from all the other sculptors who limit themselves to bronze, and in a tight art market like ours, every bit counts. All the information for the Wiltshire Workshop, which starts August 8th, can be found at our website, thesculptorsfuneral.com. There's space for just 12 people on this workshop, and the sign-up deadline is June 1st. But I have a feeling the course is going to fill up early this year based on the success of last year's course. So sign up today at thesculptorsfuneral.com or contact me directly for more details. The Wiltshire Workshop 2016. Become one of the few figurative marble sculptors out there and follow in the footsteps of the old masters. Check it all out at thesculptorsfuneral.com, and I'll see you in jolly old England. We now return to the autobiography of Giovanni Dupr&. It is necessary now for me to touch upon a question vital to art, and which was being agitated just at the time I was modeling the Abel. This work served to inflame it, and to encourage as much one side as the other. That is, either the idealists or the academicians in opposition to Bartolini, who, while he was not naturalistic in the strict sense of the word, proposed to introduce this principle into his teaching by bold innovations. When Stefano Ricci, master of sculpture in the Royal Academy, died, it was wisely decided to call Lorenzo Bartolini to take his place, and Bartolini took possession of the school with the air of a conqueror. He altered everything, theories and systems. He prohibited all study from statues and restricted the whole system of teaching to an imitation only of nature. And he pushed this principle so far that he introduced a hunchback into the school and made the young students copy him. This daring novelty raised a shout of indignation. They cried out against the profanation of the school, of the sacred principles of the beautiful, and etc., said that he was ignorant of his duties as a master, and that he misled the youths, extinguishing in them the love of the beautiful by the study of deformity, and many other accusations of this agreeable sort. This dispute was rekindled, as I have said, on the appearance of my Abel. I don't remember by which side was first pronounced my name in my work, but certain it is that Bartolini said, that the most convincing proof of the excellence of his method was precisely the Able, which statue was made by a youth who knew nothing of Phidias or Alcamenes nor of the others, who had not breathed the stifling air of the Academy, that he had trusted himself to beautiful nature, and that he had copied her with fidelity and love. After this there was fresh sarcasm against him and his system of copying nature, even when deformed, and etc. Added to this, there were long-winded eulogies on my work, and I could see that these were advanced merely to put this man into bad humor. Bartolini had taken a dislike to me, and wished to tell me so. He sent his father-in-law to summon me. I went, and when I arrived he received me in the great anteroom, and said to me with his usual striking bluntness,
"I've sent for you to tell you that I do not wish to see you again."
How astounded I was by these words you can imagine, who know the veneration and affection I had always felt for this celebrated master. And I could only reply, "Why?"
"Why? You have no more need for me, nor I of you. Stay in your own studio and don't come any more to mine."
It appeared to me so strange, not to say unreasonable, that he should send for me to tell me not to come to him, and that I could do no less than reply that I had come to his studio because he had sent for me, and that I was very sorry to be forbidden to return, as I always wished to learn.
"No matter. You understand. Each one for himself."
Notwithstanding this, the next year, as I wished for reconciliation, having made the model in clay of the Giotto, which I wanted to try in a niche of the Uffizi, to hear the opinion of my friends about it, and to correct it where it was necessary before its execution in marble, I wrote to Bartolini begging him to come to see my statue in its place to give me his authoritative opinion. He replied in a manner specially his own, I might also say with his own brutal sincerity, which distinguished him from his sugared and often hypocritical contemporaries. He could not see me. He held me in aversion, and he wished me to know it, not by his silence, but by a letter. Here it is.
"Caro, the thing which above all things I like in this world is to see the races in the Cascine, but as I have so much work which prevents me, just imagine if I shall come to see your statue."
Observe, I do not say that I expected precisely such a reply, and I was a little stunned by it. But I understood him, and I really liked it better than if he had made an excuse and told a lie. All men should be true to themselves. Bartolini was still angry with me, as I found out afterwards, because in the discussion of the hunchback, my name being brought forward, I did not enter into its defense. But then, being young and a beginner, how could I presume to offer my support to Bartolini? Would it not appear pretentious in me even to assume to be the defender of so great a master? It seemed to me so then, and it seems so now. Let it not be thought that I did not do this while arguing with my artist friends. It was quite otherwise, and this was the way in which I drew upon myself their ill feeling and dislike. But it happened then, as it happens always. The reform of Bartolini and the dogmas of the academicians never came to an end. They might have confined themselves to the indisputable principle that one should imitate life in its infinite scale of variety, always avoiding deformity. But once they had begun with the meager child, the adipose old man, the lean or flabby youth, they went on through thick and thin. It would not have been so bad had they really appreciated what Bartolini meant to say, and that is, that copying anything was very well as a mere exercise and means of learning one's art. But the misfortune was that some took the means for the end, and so went wrong. But nevertheless, this Bartolinian reform was of great advantage. Let us remember how sculpture was then studied. The teaching of Ricci was only a long and tedious exercise of copying wholesale the antique statues, good and bad. And what was worse, the criterion of Greek art was carried into the study of nude life, the characteristic forms of the antique statues supplanting those of the living model. The outlines were added to and cut away with a calm superiority which was comical. The abdominal muscles were widened, the base of the pelvis narrowed, in order to give strength and elegance to the figure. The model was never copied. The head was kept smaller and the neck fuller, so that, although the general effect was more slender and more robust, the character was falsified, and was always the same and always conventional. This restriction of nature to a single type led directly to conventionality, and once this direction was taken, and this habit of working from memory, following always a pre-established type, the artist gradually disregarded the beautiful variety of nature, and not only did not notice it, but held it in suspicion, believing that nature is always defective, and that it was absolutely necessary to correct it, and in this, they said, lies the secret of art. And yet, Bartolini cried aloud, so to speak, strained his voice to make himself understood, stood up on a table and beat his drum for the hunchback. From that time to this, there have been no more statues of Apollo and Jove and Minerva. Chased from this earth, they returned to their place on Olympus, and there they still remain. Well, thank you very much for listening, everyone, and special thanks to Chiara Perondi, returning this week to reprise her role of Marina, Giovanni Duprè*'s wife, and also to Raffaello Romanelli, who provided the voices of Lorenzo Bartolini and the president of the Accademia. Now, don't forget to check out additional content at our YouTube channel for the Sculptor's Funeral, and also on our Facebook group page. You can join in the conversation there on Facebook and do the whole online networking thing with like-minded sculptors and sculpture lovers from around the planet. You can ask a question, you can post current events, and you can get to know me and your fellow sculptors a little bit better. Don't forget, you can also go to the website of the podcast, sculptorsfuneral.com, where you can not only listen to the entire back catalog of shows, you can also visit the image galleries for this and for other episodes. And while you're there at the sculptorsfuneral.com, you can also click on the Blick Art Supplies link, which takes you to the Blick Art Supplies website, where you can support the podcast by buying from Blick. And for that, I thank you. Thanks again for listening, and have a productive week.